Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way. If you keep on the sunny side of life.
Hello. Thanks for taking a few minutes to tune into this midweek message, one of the cabin talks. It's a little bit, let's just say it's a little rainy out here. That's why I got my hat on. Pretty wet getting out here. I was going to talk to you today because when we are in times of real confusion and upheaval and change, our tendency is to get nostalgic. We tend to get longing for the good old days. And that can be, have a place where it can be encouraging to remember things, but we can get stuck there. Well, I went out walking one beautiful morning while the sun, it was shining so clear. I climbed up a mountain and I stood on its peak, facing the wind without fear. As I looked out across those blue hills like an ocean, I wondered how long would I last. I must climb up higher, I must ever press forward, for no one can live in their past. No one can live in their past. Well, you can't live in your past. You can't live in your past, 'cause the past, it don't last. You can't live in your past. You can't live in your past. You can't live in your past, 'cause the past, it won't last. You can't live in your past. Boy, that's a hard lesson to learn, isn't it? And a lot of anger and frustration that people have, it comes out of being fearful and angry because they're fearful at changes that they can't understand or control. You know, it is amazing how much negative information comes at us about, it pushes us to want to go back to a steady state someplace in the imagined past. You know, it's interesting that there's a lot of changes that have taken place, even in my lifetime, that are incredible. For example, did you know that way less percentage-wise people die of cancer now? My mom died of cancer. She would have probably survived now based on the breakthroughs in cancer. Many of you have maybe been through this in your family or struggling with it, but people have years and years, and sometimes remissions from cancer now, where it was, years ago when I was younger, it was essentially, that was it for you. In spite of all of the fear-mongering going on, do you know that overall violent crime is lower right now, just in the last few years, than it's been since the 1960s? It's an amazing thing. You wouldn't know that by listening to the news, but they play that same loop over and over again, and you get that bad news. Auto deaths. People used to die, 50, 60,000 people a year used to die in car wrecks. There's way more cars on the road and way less automobile deaths. Of course, it's no wonder we drove around a huge family in a old Suburban and there was no seat belts. It's a wonder how any of us made it. You know, I just want to say that idea that those good old days back there where if you got a disease, there was nothing they could do for you. There was no way to avoid it. It's easy to forget that distance adds enchantment. We tend to look at the past selectively through rose-colored rose-colored glasses. Doom, I want to just tell you, sells. It really does. It is a real moneymaker. Within religious circles, the teaching of eschatology, I mean the end of the world and the terrible outcomes of tribulation, etc., have been making millions, selling books and building empires of religious people as long as I've been a pastor. This idea of eschatology, it's interesting to think that many people quote religious thinkers, especially among the evangelical group, that they would be shocked at their eschatology, that many of those foundational people, even in the 20th century, were actually post-millennialists. They believed that the world would get better and better and better and better, and then Jesus would come back. Of course, premillennial thinking has become very popular. It's become the popular idea that the world is going to get worse and worse and worse, and then the end will come. I'm not here to debate those two ideas, but you can see that doom tends to be quite a popular theme. I remember one old Appalachian preacher said, "It's hard to be optimistic when you have a misty optic." In other words, when your vision gets off, when your focus gets off, when your ability to see things becomes skewed and off track, it's hard to keep things straight. It's hard to be optimistic. Think about the amazing life that God has given you. You forget that. Think about the people that, not just the people that are gone or the things that are wrong, but the things that are right, the things that are great in your life. Like Philippians 4:8 says, let your mind think on these things and not all this doom and gloom and all this negative criticism, hostility. The problem with life is sometimes I'm looking at it and I'm experiencing things with my kids or grandkids, and you may feel like this too. I just wish I could freeze this moment. I wish I could just hold on to it and just stay in it. But the problem with life is you can't freeze frame life. You have to live life. You have to savor it. I remember one of my dear friends who passed away a number of years ago, Bob Nolan, maybe one of your neighbors. He said, I have maybe over 1,000 photographs of all of my camping and hiking trips, and I took a lot of pictures, and I was going to go through them. And then he said, as he faced the end of his life, he said, I decided, no, there's no looking back. I'm going forward. I love that. I love that man. He was such a wonderful human being and such a strong person of faith. Memories can be a wonderful thing, don't get me wrong. They can warm your heart and stir up your affections for somebody. They can instruct us about things that we maybe should remember or do. But you can't live in your past, remember? Because past, it won't last. You see, you and I will tend to cling to the past because it was familiar to us. And it was, if we're honest, it's more comfortable because we filter out the bad parts. We filter out the traumatic things and the stressful things. And it's familiar to us, but if we're truthful, those memories are very, very much selective. The reality is like someone said, the good old days weren't really that good. And it really depended on how good they were, depended on maybe who you were and where you were and how you lived. Lots of you, I know many, many people in my life who grew up in places where they had terrible poverty, where they struggled, they had family members die of what they call dumb diseases, like just intestinal parasites. In America, people that grew up without electricity or grew up without any kind of access to any help at all and barely had access to school. The good old days weren't that great for a lot of people. And it is true that we can look back on times that were hard. Like maybe we'll look back on these areas and there'll be things about it that we we say, there were really good things that came out of it. And that's good to do that. But that doesn't mean they were perfect at the time. Jesus said we cling to the old wine. We're going to talk about this on Sunday when we talk about new wine and new wineskins. And we hold on to the old because we really haven't tried the new. We're just scared by it. We often live in the past toward others, and we leave no room for redemption in them. We think that's just the way they are. Kids do this with their parents. They remember you when they were teenagers, that you were stuck in some kind of probably less than perfect parental mode. They get you freeze-framed into it and pigeonhole you into it. This is the way you think. This is your opinion about everything. This is your perspective. Now, we as parents are expected to accept that our children are growing and developing and they're going through stages. But oftentimes, children will forget that your parents are just like you. They're growing. They're not the same people at 35 or 45 or 55 as they were when they were 25, and neither will you be. We don't leave room for people to really be transformed. We don't leave room for growth and change. We become threatened sometimes when they change, when they maybe have a difference of opinion. That happens with parents. Their kids begin to think their own thoughts and believe their own beliefs, and we don't necessarily like it. But the bad thing is that we can live in the past and we can look at others and have an attitude toward others that's all rooted in the past. We tend to pigeonhole people. Can't do that. We live in the past sometimes with ourselves. We can't accept the fact that maybe that we can't accept grace. We never give ourselves any grace. Just like we cannot forgive other people for their failures, and we cannot have grace and patience with them as they make changes. We cannot do that. Sometimes we fail to do that for ourselves, for our own failures. Don't live in your past. The Lord says He puts your sin away from you as far as the east is to the west. Remember it no more. Old things are past. All things become new. Did you know that that human systems for understanding ourselves always point us? Now I'm talking about, and some of these have real value. Some therapeutic systems and some ways that we kind of analyze ourselves that we assume have always been true. But most of these human systems for understanding human beings and psychological processes of human beings, they're always pointing us to where we came from. Like, you grew up this way, you had this background, you had trauma, and this has value. Insight can be important. But knowing where you came from, though it can help you, it can also, you can get stuck there. I'm trying to say that I don't want to dismiss it as completely, because sometimes knowing where you came from can help you figure out where you are right now, but you don't want to stay there. But you know what the gospel really emphasizes? The gospel says who you really are is not determined by where you came from. Who you really are is not determined by where you came from, but where you're going, where you're heading. That's what 1 John chapter 3:2, it says, "My dear friends, we are now God's children, but it is not yet clear what we shall become." You see? It's not clear what we'll become. It's not rooted in the past. It's not yet clear what we will become. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He really is. Whew. Now you think about that verse. Maybe take a little bit of time and read it in your own Bible, your own translation. 1 John 3:2. But who you really are is not determined by what you've done or where you've come from or your parents or your grandparents. It had an influence on you. But that's not who you really are. Who you really are is determined by where you're going. You see, it is the way you live in this present life. It is as you live this present life, you become what God has for you. As you deal with the stuff, and we have a lot of stuff to deal with, right? Don't lose heart in doing good, for in due season you'll reap It's out there, if you faint not. Don't lose heart in this present darkness you feel yourself in. Don't give in to the anger and rationalize it. And don't long for some fantasy of bygone days that probably never really were what you remember them to be. We live now. You can't live in your past. Stop longing for the past and see God's working in your life right now. He is present to work in your life right now. He will. And He wants to. He'll work in your family. He'll work in your relations. You can pine about those old things, or you can say, what can I do now, today? Who can I reach out to? What bridge can I build today? You see? Remember that passage, some of you do, out of Romans. It says, we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those that love God and are called according to His purpose. For those He foreknew, He predestined to become conformed to the image of His Son, so that He would be the firstborn among many brethren. Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing thing. For we know God works all things together for good for those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. He's working in this situation. He's working in this current crisis that we find ourselves in, and these tensions and these strains in relationships. He's working in that for good. Why? And what is His purpose? He works all things together for good for those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. You're called according to a purpose. It's not to go backwards. It's not to go live back in some idealized past. It's to presently be conformed to the image of His Son. He's going to glorify you. That's what He has in mind. He says in verse 30, and those whom He predestined, He called. And those who He called, He justified. And then He says, and those whom He justified, He glorified. His plan is out there. He's going to make you great, glorified. So it's time now for you to listen. It's time for you to live now. Right now, today, tonight. Whenever you're watching this, this is the time now for you to start loving God again, like you should. And start loving other people and loving your neighbor the way you're supposed to. You can do that. This is like the Christmas Carol. This is your Ebenezer Scrooge moment where you suddenly wake up from your tortured, fevered sleep and you realize, oh, I have another chance. I can live now. You can be conformed to the image of His Son. You can do that. You can start doing that today. Not fearing the future, but welcoming it. You know, someone one time said, don't fear the future. God's already there. He's already there. See, here's the thing that you need to always remember. Growth has one condition. It doesn't matter whether you're a pumpkin or one of these cedar trees behind me, or a human being. Growth has one condition: change. Constant change, really. See, there's only one immutable being in the universe, immutable or unchanging being. That's God Himself, the unmoved mover. And the creature, that'd be you and me, the creature must learn to find awe and to stay curious in the middle of change, not to lock down, not to sink into your bunker of thinking or living. And this is how we grow in times of testing. So, remember the little song I wrote? I went out a-walking one dark stormy morning while the wind was stripping my path. I climbed up a mountain and I stood on its peak, thinking of all that I have. As I looked out across those blue hills like an ocean, I wondered how long would I last. I must climb up higher, I must ever press forward, for no one can live in their past. No one can live in the past. You can't live in your past. You can't live in your past, 'cause the past, it won't last. You can't live in your past. You can't live in your past. You can't live in your past, 'cause the past, it won't last. Don't try to live in the past. Thank you for watching this. Maybe share it with somebody. You say, there's this crazy guy out there in a green coat. And you know, if you've been kind of cooped up for a while, you know, it looks like some of the risk numbers are coming down for the pandemic a little bit. And you know, you want to come to an in-person service. We do have 3 of those on Sundays, 8 o'clock, 9:30, and 11. Now the 9:30, we're trying to do an outdoor service for some of you who like that better. And we will promise you, we will make it as safe as we can for you that are concerned about that. And thank you for watching. And you know, some of you may want to comment, or you may want to share this, like I said. And I do want to tell so many of you, I appreciate you so much for your generosity. Many of you give online, or your continuous giving, you know, givers online. You can find all that on this website. Just go to give, and it'll tell you what to do. God bless you. Thank you for watching.